Hello and welcome to another Play Better Chess video. And today we have some Paul Morphy chess tactics. So Paul Morphy, considered one of the greatest players of all time. And if you want to improve your tactics in chess, definitely take a look at some Paul Morphy games. So I could have chosen Paul Morphy playing against another chess master. But I noticed a lot of those games, they're a little bit slower and have more strategy. So I wanted to pick a game where Paul Morphy is playing against an amateur here. So here is a game review to see their accuracy percentage. Paul Morphy usually does better than this, but he played at an 80% accuracy level, which is still decent, against a 66.1% accuracy level. So this would kind of be maybe an example of how if an average player played against Paul Morphy, maybe took it easy on him a little bit, but let's see what happens here. Morphy had one brilliant move, three great moves, but he did have two mistakes, two misses, and even a blunder. So he played at a 2300 level versus 2200 level. But let's see, what happened in this game. So I'll turn on the analysis. And Morphy begins with e4, a good opening move to control the center squares and allow your bishop to develop. Your queen could develop, not necessarily to that square, but anyway, the opponent plays e5, keeping things even in the center, and now the knight adds to the pressure on this pawn, or starts an attack on this pawn here, and knight to c3, or excuse me, c6 defends. All right, so now we have bishop to c4, the Italian game, which lines up through the middle towards this f pawn, which can be a weak point in these types of games. So Morphy attacks it, or at least aims at it with his bishop. And now knight to f6, usually a good strategy, bringing your knights out early. So let's see what Morphy does here. He immediately develops a pawn in the center. Morphy is known for trying to open things up and get his development moving quickly, sometimes sacrificing pawns or even pieces maybe in order to develop quickly and get an attack going. So he piles up with the knight on this pawn here, which only has one defender. So now we have two attackers. So the tension is relieved. The pawn is captured here, and Morphy, instead of capturing, he just castles immediately. And now the game is transposed from the Italian game to the Scotch game, kind of a Scotch gambit type game. And this is even called the Dubois Ready Scotch gambit. So let's see what happens here. The knight captures this pawn, but kind of maybe an amateur move. It says this is a book move, so I guess it's not too terrible. And black is actually in the lead because he's ahead by 2 pawns for the moment. But after this pin, so the first pretty important tactic here, a pin of this knight on the king here. So this knight is immobilized in the center of the board, and it would be illegal to move that knight, or you would put your king in check. So the opponent develops a pawn in the center, protecting the knight, but also attacking the bishop here. So now we have bishop captures. So an interesting tactic, removing this defender, but replacing the defending pawn with the queen. So the problem with this is now we have Morphy offering another sacrifice. But once again, we have a pin here. The pawn is pinned to the queen. So if the knight is captured, well then the queen could capture black's queen here. So kind of a crazy game already. Even though +4 as far as material for this amateur player, Morphy is only behind by 0.16 according to the computer. So the game's almost even. So the queen decides to get out of that mess, and apparently this is a book move and the game is perfectly even here. So what is played? The knight that was under attack captures, setting up another tactic, a possible discovered check here. So anytime you have a rook, a queen, or a bishop lined up on the king, your king or the opponent's king, with pieces in between, you always have to watch out. If those pieces are moved out of the way, and then there's a check on your king, could you end up in trouble? So let's see what Morphy does here. After his opponent blocks to kind of prevent that discovered check, now we have a mistake by Morphy. Knight at e to g5. Apparently the computer likes just developing the other bishop. But Morphy is trying to add to the pressure here, piling up on this bishop here with the knight and the rook together. So the game continues with a counterattack, which is a mistake, threatening the rook here. So better would have been to just immediately castle to the queen side here. Just get the king castled. The rook would have landed here on this half open file, and it would have been better for black. So how does Morphy take advantage of this little mistake here by his opponent? Well, the rook was under attack, so he captures with the rook. So sacrificing the rook. Apparently it would have been better to ignore that and just capture with the knight. So we could take a quick look at that. If the knight captured, well then, let's see. What would happen if the bishop would capture? We could look at that. The computer recommends the pawn capturing, but even then, white would be ahead. And if you have this right here, well then, knight forks. So very dangerous here. Morphy is setting up more and more threats. The possibility of getting up here and forking the king and the queen. So let's go back to see what actually happened in the game. The rook sacrifices itself. So now the knight captures, setting up the possibility of this fork here of king and queen. So dangerous possibilities building up here against Morphy's opponent. The game continues with the queen retreating to help guard this pawn. Apparently that's a mistake, and it would have been better to play king over to d7, over to here. But, then you'd be lined up, the queen would be lined up on the king, and the king would be stuck in the center. So that's probably why his opponent didn't play that. All right. Now, another knight is able to jump up into the action here, attacking. So a good little tactic here, just creating a threat, attacking the queen. This also protects the knight as well that the queen was attacking. But now the queen has to run away here, and that gives Morphy more time for his attack. So we have queen to e7, the best move. And now queen to e2. Morphy makes a mistake here. Apparently bishop to f4 would have been better, developing his bishop. And maybe Morphy just wanted to line up here on the king and queen. And let's see what happens next. At this point, the game is almost even again. So bishop retreats back and also aims at the king side. But this move is considered a mistake here. All right. So now we have, and the computer once again wanted king here to d7, getting out of the line of fire of the queen in the future, perhaps. And then there's also the possibility of this knight jumping over here and checking the king. So that, in fact, is what Morphy does. So apparently this is a miss. Just bishop to d2 would have been better. But let's look at this move. The queen, Morphy's queen, is unprotected, but nothing can be done about that because of this check on the king. And there's a pin. Morphy's queen is pinning his opponent's queen to the king. So the queen cannot even come over here and capture this checking knight. So now we have the king finally running to d7, but a missed opportunity. Apparently king to d8 would have been better. I don't know. It's looking grim for Morphy's opponent. Notice how Morphy's king is nice and safe behind his pawns because he castled early, and his opponent has been caught out in the center of the board. So, that's a good attack that you can try and run against your opponent, is if they leave their king stuck in the center, or leave their king in the center, try and open things up and get an attack going. All right. We have a check here by the queen. And so the king retreats back to d8. And now knight jumping here, forking the rook and the king. But the knight is not protected here. The queen could just capture this knight. But apparently this is a blunder by Morphy. Knight at 7 to e6 is preferred. So apparently it would have been better to just drop this knight here, checking the king, and then, what would happen next. So if you have that, king to c8, and then there's possible, if the king goes here, there's a possible discovered attack along this diagonal. All right, back to what happened in the game. All right, the queen is checking the opponent's king, and after this retreat, now we have knight forking, and this is a blunder. The best move and the only move is to capture that knight, and now bishop to g5 check is best. According to the computer, the game is completely even here, but look at this pretty strong attack against the king. Bishop attacking, the queen is lined up here, the knight is covering this square. So, the best thing here is to block with the knight or the bishop on this e7 square. But the opponent, he plays the first move well, but falters after that. So we have a check, the best move, and apparently it would be better to stay in the center with the king. But the opponent makes a blunder. And why is this a blunder? Because anytime you have a piece lined up here on your king, like this queen is, even if there's something in between, like the knight, you have to watch out for discovered attacks. So sure enough, there's a discovered attack here. We have knight dropping back to c5, discovered attack by the queen, and no matter what, there's going to be a mate in 5 or even sooner here. It looks like queen to f5, just giving the queen up is what the computer recommends, or even blocking here with the queen. Either way, the queen would be lost. Of course, the king cannot go here because then there would be an immediate mate in 1 there with queen to d7. So, what's the other option? It looks like king to b8 is played. And this sets up a very nice tactic, a little checkmate pattern here that is pretty cool. So check this out. Morphy jumps up, playing the best move here with a check, forcing the king to line back up with the queen for a discovered attack. So then we have the knight dropping back to here where two pawns are attacking the knight, but of course that doesn't matter because the queen is checking. The king cannot move here or else there is a mate in one by the queen on d7. So the king runs into the corner. But now we have a beautiful queen sacrifice, a brilliant move. And because the knight is protecting that queen, the only move possible is for the rook to capture, and the game ends with a smothered mate. So pretty cool ending there by Morphy after a pretty, I guess, ruthless attack on this amateur player. So pretty interesting, some of the tactics there that Morphy used. But you'll notice a lot of the best players, they just use a lot of the basic tactics. So all the more reason for you to study tactics, improve your tactics with puzzles or going over games like this to see what the best players do. All right, well, feel free to leave any comments, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.